Okay, here we are again. This is Spider Days, and we were in this chapter last time, and I finished, but the chapter goes on. And now remember, I'm about to take my third try going to the spider and see what happens. The first time it was a lark, the second time I felt rejected and angry and all sorts of unfortunate feelings, and had myself talked to by my boyfriend. So now we go again for the third time. And so we find Bob's 20-year-old protege. Coincidentally, he had also found my little apartment and gotten me out of my mother's house. And we find me once again trudging through the still snowbound Denver's night, heading for the now twice as frightening green spider wilderness. Once again, beneath the 8 green legs, I walked into the inner sanctum of the Denver beat culture. And once again, but no. Instead, I saw before me 2 or 3 tables bunched together, and a large group engaged in lively conversation. But how heartening could that be? Not at all. Except, from their midst, one of them immediately called out, "Hey, come over here and join us." They pulled out a chair for me, and the rest is history. A man named Don had called out those words, and wouldn't you know, here was yet another 40-year-old man, just ready to take on a protege. And this was his coffee house. He owned it. He ran it. Those were his green mermaids with the flowing hair. He'd painted them. How oddly amazing is that 4-letter word, fate. Some people don't even believe in fate, but I know myself to be the very embodiment of it. Don had just recently lost his longtime girlfriend and partner, Diana, and a young seeker of a girl came walking through his door into his lair, completely alone, 20 years old, ready to be nurtured. How lucky could a man be? Don and I needed each other. I was too young then to have understood any of that, but all that was asked of me was to roll with the flow, and I could do that. I'd given him my address, never expecting to hear from him, but the very next evening he knocked on my door bearing perfume of all things. He asked me on a date. He took me out to dinner, brought me back to the spider, set me up behind the counter, taught me how to make cappuccinos, Russians, lattes, and etc. And there I remained for close on a year. Back at my parents' house, Sunday dinner was a somewhat unwilling but nonetheless promised commitment every week. It was at the dinner table right after Don came into the picture when I simply announced to all assembled, mother, father, and brother, that I was going to quit my job and become a beatnik. How does one become a beatnik? What? What does a beatnik do? Where do they live? How do they eat? It was earth-shattering. No one knew quite what to say, or what to think for that matter. The sky had fallen. My mother's darkest fears were realized in an instant. I must have said such a horrible thing only because I hated her. There could be no other possible reason. What other explanation could there be? And she had tried so hard to make me into a decent, wholesome person. What will Dr. Noren, my pastor, what will he say? You're so selfish. You think of no one but yourself. All my hard work unappreciated. Maybe you're just plain crazy. Maybe, Mother. I tried very hard to assure her I didn't hate her. I believed in what I was doing. This was my path. It wasn't a reflection on her parenting. Well, this is an aside, but maybe to some extent it was, though I didn't think that at the time. But as it must be in such circumstances, there was no comfort for either parent. Now they were really worried. And now I'm going to go into a reflection, again of November 22nd, 1963. It's occurred to me once again how in our lives we're endlessly changing, growing, learning. One day we look in a mirror and see ourselves as we are in that moment. All our past within this life is there and comprises the whole of what we see. But it tells us nothing of what we will see next time we look. The next day or the next hour, it may look quite the same, or it may be quite a different face we see reflected back. I awoke late that Friday morning in November because I didn't have to work that day. I meandered over to my little radio and switched it on to learn the time. There was such a jumble of words and noise on every station that I turned the dial from one to another to another. Finally, I gave up and left it on one of those chaotic stations. And the face in my mirror was never again that face I'd seen last night before I turned out the light. Sorrow, true sorrow, had crept in and changed forever the face in the mirror. November 22nd, 1963. Just Friday. Nothing more, nothing less. A window decorator's party to eventually get ready for. Now, 40 years later, I don't make appointments on November 22nd. That's the day I go to my sacred box and gently turn the pages of old yellow newspapers and magazines purchased in November and December and January long ago. My mother had never tried to tell me there could be such days, but if she had, it would have gone right over my head. There would be days, but never a day like that. It was the first. The rest are piled on top of the first. Some are wonderful, some terrible, but they change the face in the mirror. Things were happening fast now. Not only in my private world, but things were happening very fast within the fabric of my native country. Soon countless mothers and fathers would shed their tears and wring their hands. Their children would leave, maybe just disappear one day, maybe head out for a faraway land called Vietnam, maybe head down to the dangerous Southland to become immersed in civil rights. The earth under everyone's feet shook mightily when those bullets hit their mark in Dallas, and the reverberation from them would ripple out from coast to coast and far beyond. We who grew up happily enough through the Eisenhower years, our 6-shooters strapped to our waists, Howdy Doody Time and the Mouseketeers, Motown and Elvis, and finally the Beatles ringing in our ears, would form a generation known simply as the 60s. Now it was early spring or late winter of '64. The snow still covered much of the ground. There was a president of the United States, but he meant nothing to me. And I trusted nothing and no one in Washington, D.C.
Boom!
Thank you, Papa. A short time ago, I'd wanted to become a young Democrat. I'd stood inside my elevator calling, "Up, please, down, please." Now someone else would call out those words and wear my beige uniform, and mingle in the 6th-floor dining room, and someone else would see their own face in the trusty bathroom mirror of my little apartment. I was gone. My few possessions were living in boxes in my distraught parents' garage. The elevator operator was a beatnik in training. My home now was an A-frame in southwest Denver with Don. At night I made exotic espresso drinks and gossiped with Sherry. Several years younger than myself, she was the real thing. Everything I'd imagined a beat chick to be. Timid as I was, Sherry was my one pal, Don my Svengali. He had me sit on a stool in the mornings and read to him from the metaphysical books on astral projection he was continually ordering through the mail. I read accounts of different people's projections while he painted on his large canvases. We awoke every morning and walked over to the little cafe where we always had the exact same breakfast. Then we walked back to his A-frame and went off into our separate dream worlds of astral travel, I on my stool and he adding big sweeping brush strokes to his canvas. Sooner or later we'd get ready and jump in his old gray car, setting off for afternoon errands and finally arriving at the Spider to set up for the evening. The evenings rolled lazily into one another, and again I was watching and waiting, but now from the inside. Fini.